The warning lights are right in your face. They're blinking red.
Pro-Hamas
Um,
activists are
these
fueling
people are
unprecedented levels
telling
of
us on
anti-Semitic
social
attacks in New
media.
York City.
They're telling us on posters on university campuses. They're telling us in lecture halls. They're screaming it at us in malls during Boxing Day that they
Terrorist
want to
flags flood the
globalize the
streets,
intifada,
while
that they
protesters
want more
openly call for
violence.
America's destruction.
Um, and so I think we really need to pay attention to the people that are saying these things. And we need to wake up and realize that the enemies are not at the gate. They're inside. They're inside the gate. They're right in
Now,
front of
an
us.
extremist from
In
within their
many
ranks
cases,
is
they're
running
living
for
right
mayor,
next door.
Zohran
They're
Mamdani.
telling us that they want to kill us. And they will.
Hello, welcome to the Viktor Frankl podcast. I'm Laura Fine, here with my co-host, the founder of the podcast, Rabbi Daniel Schoenbach, and we are delighted to have with us today Dr. Casey Babb. Dr. Babb is a fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and is a director of the Promised Land Project. He also is involved with Doctors Against Racism and Antisemitism, and is a scholar on the movements that we're seeing today have so much impact on our society. Welcome, Dr. Babb.
No, thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. I wanted to start off talking to just jump in with the big picture on your view of what are some of the dynamics that we see today that are exacerbating pre-existing hatreds of Jews, of Israel, and what do you think has made it so powerful that even after we have, even after there's a ceasefire, even after the war has kind of gone quiet, we are still seeing so much venom out in the media?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, not just since the attack in Australia, but, really since October 7th. How did we get here? What are the factors, the variables that have, created such a toxic environment, such a dangerous environment? And I keep coming back to this Jewish idea or phrase, and Daniel, help me out here if you've heard of this before, but it's this saying something along the lines of, it is not the mouse that is the thief, but the hole. And I think of that almost in terms of the issues that we're facing right now, not the Jewish community, but just the Western sort of the Western world, Western liberal democracies. It is not the fault solely of the actors who are carrying out these things. It is also on us, and we have allowed these issues to fester. We have not addressed sort of that hole or that opening for the mice to come in. There's a wide range of things that we could talk about here, and some of it, as I said on the Free Press, it's a lot of it is common sense. Some of it maybe not so much. The common sense things that are leading to a lot of the vitriol and the hatred that we're seeing right now. You know, letting in droves of individuals from countries where this sort of thinking is normal. It's not extremist rhetoric. It's not abnormal. It's not considered hatred. It's not considered bigotry. That's not to say, and I've said this 100 times, and I'll keep saying it, that I'm, against immigration. Immigration is fantastic, but we have to be smart about immigration. Then at the same time, we're also not comfortable talking about these things. We've sort of removed the ability of open discourse, at least on certain topics. Unfortunately, many of the topics that matter most. Um, you know, we could get into everything from the red-green axis, and that the fact that a lot of the most um, troubling language, the most dangerous ideologies that have really permeated for decades now, have particularly over the last few years, become progressive in nature or embraced by, progressives. Um, and I believe I talked about this on a podcast recently, how everything from, political violence, I'm thinking of the CEO in New York City who was murdered. Um, Here in Ottawa, Toronto, I saw them as well. I saw them in New York City. posters and stickers on lampposts and on university campuses glorifying the killer. I saw stickers glorifying the death of IDF soldiers. I've seen posters glorifying terrorists. So it's not an embrace of radical Islam. It's an embrace of um,
Radicalism.
yeah, this new idea that is these worldviews, these ideologies are just sort of a new wave of radicalism. And so it's all of these things. There's not one clear answer, Laura, but it's really many things converging at once that have created a really, really troubling sort of picture for us to deal with. And for me, I think the most important thing that we can start doing right now is start talking about these things because and I've mentioned this before, terrorism has been a part of my life almost my entire life. But nobody ever talks about it. And now we don't have a choice any longer. Now is the time to get real and start having conversations like this.
I think that there has been in the past efforts at drawing attention to radical Islam have been looked at as Islamophobic, as
Right.
racist, and we continue to see that today. Although we're starting to see some cracks in that because there have been multiple murderous events on U.S. soil and in Australia, in the Western world, that people are starting to wake up and think, hey, I don't want that happening and I don't want to have to change my lifestyle to avoid it. Maybe we need to do more. I want to go back to one of the sources that you talk about elsewhere and that you mentioned briefly, which is our educational system. And there's a lot of attention right now being paid to K through 12 indoctrination, but obviously collegiate indoctrination has been going on for decades. And I know myself, I have a lot of involvement with various universities. I'm a graduate of Harvard and Columbia, and I've had multiple meetings with administrators at Harvard in the last couple of months, questioning the idea that was brought up in such a open way 2 years ago in December that cost the president her job. That calling for the genocide of Jews is it contrary to university policies? Is it contrary to your code of conduct? And when I spoke to them just a month ago, they say actually that is still the rule. That is still our view, is that whatever anyone wants to say goes. That's our interpretation of free speech, and we endorse that. And when we press them, even in the classroom, because we know that this is going on inside the classrooms, they still say, well, whatever they want to teach is fine. How do you feel about that? I mean, what is the approach that you would take in engagement with universities who are allowing their faculty to be teaching this sort of really destructive, dangerous, venomous hatred?
Yeah, look, I've spent many, many years like you on university campuses as a student, doing my undergrad, my master's, and PhD, all at different universities across the country, and I've taught at different universities. And yes, these issues have been going on for decades, but I will say they've gotten a lot worse in the last few years. And there's so many issues that I look at and I go, we should probably have a conversation about some of these things. I mean, the fact that yeah, I've never been a fan of professors becoming tenure track professors who are locked in forever, who can now say anything they want, teach our children anything they want, and there's virtually no repercussions for that. That's a bit of a problem. For instance, there was a McGill University professor recently who said publicly that anything short of full military and economic support of Hamas is a failure. He's not gonna, he didn't lose his job for that. I believe he got removed from some sort of, insignificant committee of some sort. If you go back and you look at October 7th and the fallout of October 7th and the immediate aftermath, some of the most disgusting things that were said, even to this day, were said by university professors. Um, and so there are a lot of issues there. I mean, universities have really become indoctrination centers for some of the most extreme thinkers among us. They are not teaching our children what we would want them to teach them or what we would expect them to teach them. Um, and to your point that, anything anybody says goes, that's what they say, but that's not applied to any other group of people. I mean, if we started taking some of the anti-Semitic extremist vitriol that we've seen directed towards Jewish students and Israel and applied that to any other minority group, I mean,
including radical Islamists.
it would be the impacts of that would be insane. So I mean, it'd be on the cover of every newspaper. I'm sure in those cases people would lose their jobs. So there's a double standard there that's very pronounced in academia. Um, but as somebody who's been in the classroom and even since October 7th, I'll tell you this, for instance. So October 7th, 2023, I was not teaching that semester, but I was scheduled to teach the following semester, which starts in January. So that's what, 3 months later. Um, and now October 7th isn't October 7th. We're now fully into the war in Gaza, the war against Hamas. And so I kind of go to the university administrators and I say, you've got me teaching your capstone graduate course on terrorism at a time when probably the most significant counterterrorism operation in human history is happening, and one of the most barbaric terrorist attacks in human history just took place 3 months ago. Anything that we should talk about? Are you here to support me? Like, do we want to have it? No, you're fine. Go ahead. So I just go right into the classroom. And so it's only been about 3 months, and it's day one or day two, and talks of genocide start coming up. And one of the students in the class, and I won't name names, God forbid, can't do any, I wouldn't do that. But this person said, I think it's plausible that a genocide is happening. And it's 3 months. Like, I mean, basically still finding bodies from what happened on October 7th. And so we had a bit of a debate. And after that class that night, I thought to myself, that student holds a not insignificant position in the law enforcement community, by the way, in the intelligence and national security community. Um, I thought to myself, this person is quite young. They're probably 21, 22, maybe slightly older. They're already thinking these things when they've arrived to me this way. So they've been learning to think this way for years, and I'm seeing more and more of that. First year students, I was a teacher's assistant, a teaching assistant at Carleton University for years, marking first and second year papers. That's one of the lovely perks of being a PhD student. You get to be a TA for as long as you want. I'm marking papers, Laura, that are almost unreadable. Not the grammar is out the window. Forget punctuation. The ability to put together cohesive thoughts on relatively straightforward topics. I mean, I'm not marking
Well,
papers on the
welcome to the post-COVID world.
yeah, I'm not marking papers on anti-Semitism. I'm not marking papers on religion. Nothing that requires like great intellectual depth and nuance and cerebral thinking. I'm marking papers that, you would think your average teenager could put together and get an A on or a B. And students are coming to us and it's clear that they've been failed already. Like they're not there. And so that is one of the things that keeps me up at night when we look at literacy rates, attention spans, social media use. And then you layer this, you combine this with things like, AI, new and emerging technologies that are disseminating the most dangerous messaging maybe ever in terms of volume and frequency. It's creating a really toxic environment in universities. So I guess my answer is at least twofold here. The pipeline is polluted already. When they get to universities, a lot of the damage is already done. And then they get to universities, and as a society, large swaths of our populations are indulging, these really troubling ideas, these progressive ideas, which are not progressive in most cases whatsoever. So it's all of these things coming together at once. And that's why you have universities which have basically become no-go zones for open Jewish life. It's just a fact. And it's it's heartbreaking, really, because universities have for a very, very, very long time been sort of a pillar of Western liberal democracies and a pillar of what makes us great. And you can see us losing them in real time. And that really worries me.
Yeah. Let's move from the campuses to the streets of North America. Let's go many miles away before we even get there. We had this horrific massacre a few weeks ago, first night of Hanukkah in Bondi Beach. But, Dr. Babb, there were many signals that that was coming up in society. As an international expert on terrorism, what are the signs that we should watch out for right now in North America? In fact, just after the attack in Bondi, this Imam of Peace got on a podcast and said Toronto is next. He was warning Torontonians about that. A
Sure.
wonderful place of liberal democracy, Canada. But what is it today? What does Canada and parts of North America mean to Hezbollah, Hamas, the mullahs of Iran? What are the danger signals right now? What do we have to worry about and focus our attention on?
Unfortunately, there's almost too much to focus our attention on. Again, I've been watching terrorism and terrorism events related to terrorism unfold my entire adult life, just like both of you have. Um, and for some reason, they've almost become normalized to the point where we go, oh, well, what else is new? Like I was thinking recently about how quickly these things move from the news cycle. They're just cycled right out. For instance, Daniel, there was a case in Toronto of several young men. This was in the news. This was in the national news. You tell me if you even heard about this in the US. Several young men. It was a terrorism plot that was thwarted, and it involved the kidnapping of young Jewish women. That was
Yeah,
in the
it
news.
was just it was a few days ago. It was last week.
In and out, though. And people just go, yeah, whatever. Most people, if I bring that up to in Canada, they will have either not heard of it at all, or they'll go, yeah, I think I heard something about that. So you want to go grab a bite to eat? Like it's not even on people's radar. To me, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the last few years. The warning lights are right in your face. They're blinking red. Um, these people are telling us on social media, they're telling us on on university campuses, they're telling us in lecture halls, they're screaming it at us in malls during Boxing Day that they want to globalize the intifada, that they want more violence. And so I think we really need to pay attention to the people that are saying these things. And we need to wake up and realize that the enemies are not at the gate. They're inside. They're inside the gate. They're right in front of us. In many cases, they're living right next door. They're telling us that they want to kill us, and they will. And time again, um, we just pretend like it's a case of it's a one-off or it's a few bad apples. In roughly the year after October 7th, terrorism-related charges in Canada were up almost 500%. Um, it's every other month now. At one point, it was every other week. Now it's every other month. We're seeing a terrorism-related incident involving Canadians. This is mind-boggling. And for some reason, we're not going to talk about this. I think a part of that is that we've been conditioned after 9/11 to, if it's Islamic terrorism, we just got to let it go. We can't talk about it. We can't offend. We could get in trouble at work. Maybe it'll make people uncomfortable. Let's just let it go and pretend that this is just we'll work our way through this somehow. We got to get over that. So there are people out there, they're telling us these things to our faces. We're seeing attacks like Bondi. We're seeing attacks like in Washington, D.C. and Boulder. Forget October 7th. There's just an endless wave of terrorism that's unfolding right now. I think, the West is going through a terrorism crisis, an extremism and radicalization crisis. And so I really think we need to start holding not just our leaders at all levels and all institutions to account. I think as a people, we need to wake up to the fact that no one's going to come to our rescue. If unless we demand that these issues are substantively addressed, why would anyone feel compelled to address them? If if we are not, taking to the streets sort of metaphorically or literally to say enough. We need to deal with this issue, this issue, this issue, and this issue. And if we do that, maybe terrorism and the threat of terrorism will subside or diminish slightly or, you know, to a meaningful degree. But unless we do that, I don't see why any leader at a university or at any level of government or anywhere is really going to come out and risk votes or risk saying something that could be unpopular when as a society we just sort of carry on with our day-to-day business because
Unless we make more noise, nobody listens,
that's
basically.
it. And I also think a lot about time. And I've talked about this before with other people. We live in a society where we think about things very short term. We want things now. We want the next, latte now. We want to lose 5 pounds now. We want the next relationship now. We want the next new car now. I, I'm thinking 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. What do people think that this is going to look like in a couple decades from now if we don't get loud, if we don't demand more? So
I think
that's
it's
really,
much more short term than that, even. I think we're talking about the next couple of months to couple of years.
you could be
When we
right.
have multiple murders on US soil happening, I think that, it, I don't think we have such a long timeline. I wanted to ask you something in terms, I agree with you that things go in and out. Our attention spans are so short these days. And, if it doesn't affect us personally, people don't seem to really care. But I think there's also another reason for that. And that's the way these things are so often framed as lone wolf
Yeah.
or, solo actor. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of the Charlie Kirk murder, or the actor in at Brown University, or the shooter outside of that shot the two embassy employees in DC or in Colorado. And when we frame it as one crazy guy, I think that people are less interested in trying to figure out how to do something about it, because after all, how can you possibly police every single potentially violent, crazy person in the country? But I think, especially when it comes to Islamic terror,
Mm.
that is not really what the dynamic is. What it appears to me is that there are large organizations, international organizations, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood and its many branches, CARE in the US, the Center for Islamic, and there's multiple centers that are funding. You have state sponsors, Qatar, Iran, that are sponsoring these terrorist groups. I'd love to hear your expert opinion and talk a little bit more about, like, whether the framing of these attacks as being by solo operators is accurate. Is the public understanding accurate in that sense, or do you agree that there is much more going on behind the scenes, and that our law enforcement and our government really needs to be getting deeper at these large groups? And we saw last week that Trump was talking about, banning certain groups, and that is sort of a step forward. But I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's a bit of both, Laura. It's on the one hand, you could argue that yes, technically, a lot of these individuals are lone wolves or lone actors. The father-son duo in Australia, for instance. Now, do we know exactly what they did in the Philippines? At this point, no, I don't know. And then if we find out that they were, you know, partaking in some terrorist training camp or something along those lines, then are they still lone wolves? Well, I mean, are lone actors? That's debatable. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's just the two of them. Okay, well, they're the ones that went out and killed people on a beach, and they killed Matilda, and they shot my friend Arson in the head, and they killed, 14 other individuals. but they have a whole ecosystem behind them. And so in that sense, they are not lone actors. Um, they have people who are in their community who believe everything that Yahya Sinwar and Osama bin Laden have ever said are probably spot on and right on the money. They have people in their community who send money to countries abroad or internally within Australia or throughout the West to fund terrorism. They give people, there are people in their community who no doubt sympathize to such an extent that they will open their doors to people who want to harm us. So there's a whole there are we could talk about what's happening in some of these religious institutions as well. That's a whole other conversation. But so it's one thing to say, yeah, the trigger man or trigger men are they're lone actors, but behind them and around them is an ecosystem of terrorism that really enables them and pushes them forward. And that's where we are with most of these cases. And so, to a certain extent, the days of these, large scale, rather grandiose and appalling, massive terrorist attacks like 9/11, I don't think those are necessarily behind us. I think we should always be vigilant and ready for another large scale attack. But it's a lot easier for, individuals in small silos, either by themselves or with a very small group of people, and a couple of rifles and a couple of bombs to just go out and do a lot of damage. I mean, look at the Boston bombers. But um, to go back to it, if as a society, as a people, we want to carry on with our lives and carry on with our business and just say, yeah, but it's just a couple of nut jobs. Okay. Well, you tell me that in 20 years or 30 years from now. I mean, the signs are already there. Again, the warning lights are blinking red. We really need to crack down on these things. And I will say this for the listeners. If you are hesitant to talk about these things publicly or to demand action from, leaders, whether they're political or, in the workplace or what have you, at the university level, if you're hesitant to talk about these things, ask yourself what is more dangerous, what will be more destabilizing if you say something or if you say nothing at all. That is where the real danger is not saying something. So yeah, there's lone actors, but there's a whole world and many people supporting these folks.
You've mentioned that Canada today is like a sandbox for international terrorism. Could you comment on that, please? How Canada has become a fertile ground for the funding of terror and the political expression of terror today? Maybe even more dangerous than the United States, for all I know.
Yeah, I would say more dangerous than the United States for a variety of reasons. Uh, so you have the basic things that are, let's just think of them as low-hanging fruit. And this is an issue in other countries as well. Unchecked immigration. Okay, we've got stuff like that. We've got, the radicalization happening on our university campuses. That's happening in the US, that's happening throughout the Western world. By the way, I just saw a video today. I believe it's a professor, and if I get the location wrong, don't start with me, anybody on X. I'm trying my best here. It's a lot of videos out there. But a professor, I believe in Lyon, um, in France, was kicked out of his classroom by like pro-Palestinian protesters. So, I mean, you're seeing this stuff all over the place. So you've got things like immigration, you've got what's happening on university campuses, other major public policy issues. But then you also have broader, more almost like philosophical, theoretical things that I am interested in, which is, in Canada, national security is not it's not part of our national identity. Um, some people will understand what I'm saying, other people will not. But you're not going to go to typically a football game here in Canada and have, a stealth bomber fly overhead. There's something there in countries like the US, countries like Israel, maybe a handful of other states where national security, and it's not because Canada doesn't have fantastic practitioners working in this space, but just as a culture, not only do we not really take those things seriously, we almost as soon as we start to take measures to really crack down on major national security issues, many Canadians go, "Whoa, that's we don't like that. We do not like that." So trying to thread the needle between, protecting individuals and their liberties and taking national security seriously. That's a real issue here that's connected to our national identity. We also have this really terrible permission structure that's connected to all of the things I've just mentioned, where the expectation, again, it's sort of connected to our identity. The expectation when you come into Canada is not that you embrace some um, well-established, well-known, internationally known way of life. What would that be? If somebody said, "Oh, Casey, I want to come to Canada. Um, what do I buy? Like, what does that mean? I want to become a fully Canadian citizen." I'd go, "I don't know." And people come here and they joke, and it's annoying when they joke about Tim Hortons or going to see a hockey game or how cold it is. Well, they keep joking about these things because beyond that, what are they going to buy into? So when we allow people to come into Canada, the message almost, in some cases, it's directly said to them from individuals, but the message is sort of implied that just come as you are. Just, we're here to take whoever in whenever for whatever reason. Um, and that's a real problem. So it's all of these issues. It's our identity. It's major public policy issues. It's not taking national security seriously enough. It's allowing these issues to fester for so long, frankly, for generations. And so because of that, you have state actors like Iran or non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas. They look at America, especially with an administration like this administration, and they're probably going, let's not mess around there right now. Like, let's maybe not do that. But Canada, for decades, it's looked pretty good. I wrote an article for the Free Press on former Iranian officials. I shouldn't say former because some of them are former, some of them maybe are not, on senior Iranian officials from the regime coming into Canada despite them being inadmissible on paper. And I interviewed a dozen or more experts on Iran, Iranian dissidents, activists, journalists, experts who really understand the space. And I asked them, almost all of them, the same questions. And one of my first questions was, why are they coming here to Canada? And the answer always, every single time, was because they know they can. And Daniel, to answer your question, it's all of this again coming together, and it's made Canada a really dangerous place. And what people are really afraid of here in Canada, and I say this almost jokingly, but there's some truth here. The stereotype of Canadians being very nice and polite. Canadians are petrified of being labeled something. They would rather die, they would rather their grandchildren not have the same opportunities they have than say something offensive and be labeled something. And so that is going to get us killed. And I got to be honest with you, I'm here in Ottawa right now. You just feel it. Like we're just waiting for something to happen. And it's starting to change people's behavior, and it's really scary.
And I find it remarkable because you've pointed out in various lectures on podcasts that there are Arab countries that are more sophisticated in their response to terrorism than the United States and Canada, i.e., the UAE. Could you talk about what more moderate, smart, intelligent Arab Muslim societies are doing, like UAE, to prevent the spread of terror in their societies? And what messages could we take from that back to the United States and Canada?
I mean, at the end of the day, Daniel, and I talked about this. We talked about it briefly earlier before coming online. When I sat down with Rafaela on the Free Press, a lot of these countries, what they're doing is not necessarily extraordinary. It's not like they had to give it a great deal of thought and have all of these policy discussions that carried on for years or decades. You look at a country like the UAE and they go, okay, well, we want to be an economic leader, an economic superpower. We want to be a tech leader. We want to be a advanced technological hub. We want to embrace pluralism. all of these things. We want to be a beacon of hope and prosperity in the region. Well, if you have extremists and radicals running amok in your country, that's not going to be great for achieving the things that you've set out to do. So they crack down on that. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood has, compare what the Brotherhood is doing in Canada, the United States, to what they're doing in cities like Abu Dhabi or Dubai. Um, I mean, it's not comparable. So I think a lot of these countries they're just very pragmatic. They look at where they want to go and where they want to be. And then they go, well, if we allow these individuals or these organizations to treat our country like their forward operating base, we're not going to get there. Or if we are going to get there, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to do that. So they crack down on these things. So I think that's part of the conversation too. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, like Canadians, Americans, Western individ people living in the West ask yourselves what you want for your country. And if what you're seeing now in your country is sufficient, are you on the path to give your grandchildren or your great grandchildren a better life? Is your country on that road? What obstacles are in the way, from economic obstacles to socio-political ones, like some of the things that we're talking about right now. But I think it's pretty straightforward. I think we just have to demand more from ourselves and from our communities, and um, we have to really wake up to the fact that things aren't just going to organically improve and get better. We have to demand more.
So what's on our demand list? What are we asking for? What if we wanted to take a list and we were having, let's say, a group of people lobbying, or if our listeners, many of our listeners write articles themselves and are influential in their own circles, what is your demand list that you think that they should be forwarding?
Well, our tolerance for extremist rhetoric and ideas being just in our face should be zero. I do not, I keep asking people, why do we tolerate any of this nonsense? That should be non-negotiable.
What
Uh,
type of rhetoric are you talking about? You're talking about the protests in the street. We should shut them down.
Yeah, I mean, why is there a young man in Ottawa dressing up shortly after October 7th as a member of Hamas, taunting people downtown Ottawa? Why in Toronto is there a man dressed as Yahya Sinwar at a protest in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood? I mean, how is this not the front page on the cover story on every newspaper in the country and on the front page of every newspaper, maybe in the world? Are we afraid of offending those people? I don't understand it. Our
I mean, in
tall,
America, it's a constitutionally protected right to dress up how you want, to speak what you want in public. The whether you can have these large disruptive protests that have no permits, that's another matter. There's obviously time, place, and manner
yeah,
restrictions are considered
absolutely.
constitutional, but there's no. I mean, I don't see a way that under U.S. law you could have a government eliminate people making such kind of dress up
No,
or demonstrations.
right. And I'm not necessarily saying infringe on um their rights, which are protected. I'm saying there's an apathy socially that I find bewildering where these things happen and there's not mass outrage. People should wake up and be really quite pissed off with a lot of this stuff that's going on. And it's like they don't care, and I don't want to this would be for another podcast, but if we look at Canada's Jewish population, for instance, let's just say it's 400,000 people. How many in the community in Canada are really out there, putting their neck out there and trying to affect change in any substantive way? Let's just be, people will get mad at me for this, but that's fine. Um, let's just say it's 100 people. Well, 100 of 400,000 is something like 0.025% of 400,000. So where is everybody? So if we want to affect change, I mean, that would be the big one for me. Like get get irritated, demand more. Don't just take this as a sort of part of the natural world or something that we're expected to tolerate. I think we
Or
need to,
or don't take it as something inevitable, something that you could actually influence.
yeah, absolutely. Another thing that we could do, and to your point in terms of changing laws, and Laura, you said, you don't, that probably wouldn't be possible, which I agree with. And frankly, I wouldn't want that that's a very slippery, dangerous slope to start infringing on people's rights in that way. But um, uh, there are major public policy issues that people should be really demanding more better accountability on in terms of immigration. We have to do more to crack down on what many of these charities are doing. We need to demand more from our universities, K through
It's
12.
it's it's instead of defunding the police, we should be defunding the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas and
All
CARE.
of all of this stuff. Our adversaries have no trouble getting loud and infiltrating every sphere of our society. Why, what are we doing? So, I think we really need to get out there and see that we can have an impact. Yeah, do I want to be on, let's just say, some committee as part of the school board? No, probably not. But if I don't, who's going to take that spot? What will they be pushing for? If I, don't write that op-ed on, immigration, well, what is going to fill that space? If I don't go to a counter protest, well, what message will that send to protesters? I mean, there's just so many things where I go, this is just get out there and do something. And I think if you do that, if you make some noise, we might actually be able to affect some change.
All right. Well, I hope you're right. I think that, look, Daniel and I made a huge effort with Mamdani, and obviously we see that that was not enough. And we are going to be facing a new situation in New York starting tomorrow, actually, where we have where the government is led by someone who endorses these very dangerous views. He doesn't openly endorse violence, but he won't condemn it. He won't condemn the ideologies behind it. And I think that as the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, possibly the largest Jewish city in the world, it's a very dangerous moment and it's very concerning. Do you have any thoughts about what those who are awake to this issue might be able to do in such a situation?
Well, I would just say this, it's been a long 2 years or 2.5 years, right, since October 7th. And I think there's a fatigue that's starting to set in with a lot of people. And I think a lot of people are starting to feel really defeated. A young woman was just murdered in Israel for the crime, I guess, of waiting for a bus and being Jewish. You have Matilda in Australia and all of the others who lost their lives. You have a young woman in Israel who just came out and um, heroically and courageously recounted the sexual abuse that she had to endure by Palestinians in Gaza for months on end. I think it's natural that at a certain point people just go, I can't take this anymore. Like I'm tapping out. But I would beg people really to, if you need to take a little time here early in 2026, do that, recalibrate, maybe exercise some self-preservation. But you got to get real here. We're in it for the long haul, and if you're listening to this, we need you, and you matter, and it matters if you go to that school board meeting, or it matters if you have that conversation with your teenage son or daughter about what university they're going to go to, and it matters if you write that politician about that issue that is, you're concerned with, or, your local police force. That post on social media that you're maybe afraid to make because you think it might ruffle some feathers, you might lose a few friends. Maybe those are the friends that you probably want to lose. So this takes a whole of society approach. It's going to take all of us working together. And so that's what I would say. Yeah, you have the Mamdani situation right now, but this doesn't need to be the norm. We don't need another Mamdani. And if we work hard, we can hopefully avoid having this situation happen again and happen in other major cities like Toronto or Los Angeles or wherever, but I see him and people like him who share his worldview is to be among the most dangerous people around us. And we need to get real that if we stay quiet and if we just carry on with our business and worry about the next latte or the next client or the next vacation, our children, our grandchildren won't well, they won't have the luxury of worrying about those things.
Well, Dr. Babs, thank you so much for joining us today. How do people follow your work online? Where do they go to read more about what you're talking about and your posts?
I post most of my stuff on X. I'm at Dr. Dr. Casey Babb, and on my website, www.caseybab.ca. I try to get out there and do my part just like everybody else. And so I really appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we can have a conversation like this down the road.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much for
It's
joining
been a
us.
pleasure.
Thanks for having me.